Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here, your source for gaming, tech, emulation, and open source news. Let's get started. Alright, we'll kick things off talking about Nintendo Switch emulation on Android with Yuzu, and Yuzu just got a brand new update. This update applies to both the free mainline version and the paid testing early access version, and we've got a whole bunch of fixes and some brand new features. It fixed another situation where the input overlay could lay out incorrectly. They fixed an issue where the config file wasn't regenerated when pressing the reset settings button. They fixed an issue where a button in the input overlay could get stuck if you pressed it while swiping to open the in-game menu. They fixed an issue where some controllers would have their inputs incorrectly forwarded to player 2. They fixed a weird issue where things would appear stretched if you rotated your device before emulation started. And they fixed an annoying issue where the low memory notice would appear regardless of how much memory the device had. And in terms of things they added here, they added a new page to manage all of Yuzu's data in one place. They added a new GPU driver manager. They added a new page to launch applets using installed firmware. They reorganized the whole settings tab to put the most used options and features on top. For wide screens, they split the settings tab into 2 columns. And they updated translations. If you've got a Snapdragon CPU, there is a side note here. The latest turnip driver is required to get proper support on Adreno 725 and 730 GPUs, so update accordingly. At the time of filming, the latest turnip drivers are version 24.0.0. I'll drop a link to this GitHub in the description below in the event that you wanted to check it out. Moving on, and we're talking about Wine, which stands for Subscribe to Mr. Sujano, or Wine is not an emulator, depending on how you want to interpret that. And Wine version 8.20 just released. It's the development build. So we've got a bunch of bug fixes here, including one for Max Payne that didn't have sound, and Neverwinter Nights 2 Complete that would crash when starting a new game from the menu. Moving on, and we're quickly talking about PlayStation 3 emulation with RPCS3, and RPCS3 just made some tweaks to save states. If you wanted to check up on this in detail, I'll drop a link to the GitHub in the description below. It's called Implement Initial RAM Ventilation System. So they say here that save states can range anywhere from a few hundred megabytes to a few gigabytes, if not more. And until now, the entire file contents were kept in RAM. This applied to both reading and writing of save states. They've implemented something here called breathing points, where the file contents may or may not move from RAM to disk when writing save states, or simply discard data when reading save states. But this does depend on the size of the save state, obviously because the disk is slower than RAM, and it might have a performance impact. This does prevent RAM shortages by reducing the total memory consumption. Now, if your system has a ton of RAM, you're probably not going to notice anything, but if your system is light on RAM and RPCS3 save states were causing a headache, this new update may help out. Next up, we've got another quick one, and hopefully this one has a good ending in the near future. There was a Yahoo auction for Battle Choice, which was an unreleased Konami game from 1988 for the NES. Anyways, here the auction ended at a whopping $15,845 for this game. The game has not been dumped as of yet. The game had never been seen until we have these screenshots here. So fingers crossed this game gets dumped in the near future, but who knows. Next up here, another quick one. If you're a streamer or like recording stuff on your screen, OBS Studio just released version 30.0. It's got some brand new features here, including a brand new safe mode that disables third-party plugins if something goes wrong. On top of that, they added support for Intel QSVH264, HEVC, and AV1 on Linux. And they added a shader cache to improve OBS startup time on Windows. There's a whole bunch more changes here and a number of bug fixes. Overall, this is a very big release. And speaking about big releases, next up here we're talking about Linux Kernel 6.7 release candidate 1. And they say here that in the number of commits, this is the biggest merge window they've ever had, with 15.4 thousand non-merge commits. So at a very, very high level, with kernel 6.7, there's a whole bunch of improvements, including improvements to hardware and driver support, improvements to BTRFS file system, ext4 file system, networking, and even more. Next up here, if you're a fan of Tetris and the Game Boy, you may be a fan of DMGTRIS. It's a block stacking game from the original Game Boy written in assembly, and it is free, it's open source, and I'll drop a link to it in the description below. And interestingly enough, there's a version of it that can also be played in your browser, and you can find that as well on the GitHub. Moving on, and we're talking about Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, and reviews for this game have not been kind. If we take a look over on OpenCritic, its OpenCritic rating is weak. Its top critic average is 56, and only 4% of critics actually recommend this game. I don't want to say this game was rushed, but it appears it was. After going through a whole bunch of reviews, the main complaints here seem to be around the campaign, and the main positive reviews seem to be people who don't care about the campaign. Let me know your thoughts about Modern Warfare 3 in the comments below. Have you played it? Do you like it? Do you care about the campaign, or is it strictly an online game for you? Next up, we're talking about Ubisoft, and in my opinion, this is super unfortunate. The title says Ubisoft is on the NFT sauce again. A new partnership with the Web3 platform Immutable aims to create a fresh new experience that players will love. If you are curious about this one, I'll drop a link to the article in the description below and feel free to check it out. I'm not quite sure on how I feel about it. I mean, Sega also was looking into NFTs for their Super game, and now Ubisoft. Is this a resurgence of NFTs? Next up, we're talking about something that doesn't use NFTs, at least not to my knowledge. It is Braid Anniversary Edition. It was just announced and it's releasing on April 30th, 2024. And interestingly enough, it's headed to iOS and Android via Netflix. Some of the big changes here surround the visuals. They have been updated and looking a heck of a lot better. Here's a closer look at the graphics, and I'd argue they did not lose their charm in the process of updating them. This is a very nice update, at least in my opinion. On top of that, there's a brand new world with a whole bunch of new puzzles. And speaking about Android, next up we're talking about a couple of games that have taken Android by storm. One of them is Warcraft Rumble. The game hasn't even been out for a month yet and already has 1 million downloads. The second game is Coromon, which came out a couple of weeks before Warhammer and already has 1 million downloads as well. And this is a Pokemon-inspired game, free to try, and I think it's about $5 to buy. Personally, I have not played either of these games yet, but Coromon has caught my eye. And speaking about Android, next up we're talking about Qualcom and iridium, and this one is a little bit weird. Earlier on this year, Qualcomm and Iridium announced a partnership of sorts to bring satellite access to Snapdragon CPUs. I think it was mainly for texting. Anyways here, apparently Qualcomm did not implement any of this technology in their Snapdragon CPUs, and as such, Iridium has announced that they're no longer working with Qualcomm. According to this statement, it was Qualcomm who notified Iridium that it had elected to terminate the agreements effective December 3rd, so arguably not even a year later. Unfortunately, I've got no idea what the reason was behind Qualcomm pulling out of that agreement, but at the same time here, the whole technology, I would argue, seemed primitive compared to something like this. I could be absolutely wrong though, but T-Mobile working with SpaceX to improve coverage seems a little bit more effective than emergency and text messaging through satellite. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. And on a side note here, it appears that Qualcomm is already working with a company to take 5G into low orbit, so I guess we'll see how that goes. Moving on, and still talking about Android here, and this time with Amazon, and apparently Amazon is ditching Android for their Fire TVs and Fire Sticks and smart displays. So this alternative, and I guess competitive operating system to iOS and Android is codenamed Vega OS, and it is being developed by Amazon, and apparently it's been worked on for years here. I'm very curious to see what happens if APKs or anything is compatible with it, or brand new apps are going to have to be developed for it. Like everything I talk about, the link for this will be in the description below, and I do recommend checking it out. Vega is reportedly a web-forward operating system built on Linux. I don't know how sales of Fire Sticks are going to go if they don't have Android on them. I do know that Fire Sticks are very popular for side-loading apps. And last up here, this is a fun one. If you're a fan of Skyrim, if you're a fan of Ultra HD graphics, if you're a fan of awesome calming stuff, you might be a fan of this video here. It's Winterhold in Skyrim in Unreal Engine 5. and it's absolutely gorgeous. Again, I'll drop a link in the description below. But anyways, that is all I've got for you in this one. Straight to the point, all stuff and no fluff. We talked about a bunch today. Let me know your thoughts about absolutely any of it in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button. Check out my other videos. Don't tempt fate. Save your state.